You're tuned to An American Atheist. AmericanAtheist.org is the blog. This is episode 96. I'm Tom Beasley, and I'm joined today with Chris Thielen. Today we're going to discuss some news topics. The Foundation Beyond Belief is creating a Humanist service corps. Congress also responded to the request for Humanist chaplains. And we're going to talk in some detail about the new Pope and some of his more progressive views. And we're going to discuss whether or not people should respect each other's beliefs. At the end of the show, we have an interview with David Diskin about Camp Quest, a secular summer camp for youth. Hi, Chris. How you been?
Hey, I'm good. Congratulations on taking the bar exam.
Thank you. I took the California bar exam. It's terrible. I don't recommend anyone do it.
Yeah, not a recreational activity?
No, it's 3 days. It's 6 hours a day. So about 18 hours of testing.
How long do you have to wait to find out?
A few months. I found out in late November. And yeah.
Jeez.
Takes a long time.
Well, in the meantime, atheist blogging, I suppose.
Right. So actually, you were interested in this human service corps, and I guess we had some questions about it. What did you find out about this?
Well, the Foundation Beyond Belief sent out a press release stating that on the 1st of August, they were going to be sending out 4 young people to 8 different countries over the next year to do the sort of typical process of working with NGOs and doing education abroad and clean water. And this is part of a grander vision, supposedly, that they have, or presumably, to create a humanist service corps. Of course, recall that a lot of religions have some form of a service corps. Mormons famously do missionary projects. There have been criticisms of Christians who go down to Mexico who, will do something like build an outhouse where previously they were, burying their remainings, and that causes, sanitation problems, and people are laughing at them. But this is, this is the Foundation Beyond Belief trying to do this. My only quibble with it, I suppose, would be that the Peace Corps, which I believe is run by the United States government, at least their website is at .gov, very authoritative research there, is already, as far as I can tell, a secular organization, and a fairly big one. So there's nothing wrong with doing added charity, I suppose, but in terms of, the need for a secularist service corps, we already have one. We have a good one.
Well, as to your first thing, I do think that many Christians do a lot of proselytization instead of actual humanitarian work in some regions, and then pat themselves on the back for it. I don't doubt that there's many who do actual good work, in other countries, but some merely spread the Bibles to spread the word.
It's true. It comes in a theist flavor. Your new outhouse has like a cross on it. Metaphorically speaking, I'm sure there's simple buildings.
Yeah. But your second, I guess, other point is sort of, I guess, well, why do we do this if there's already a secular alternative, right? Mm. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think that there's any problem with throwing on more charity where there's already charity. I mean, we're, as long as people are starving or sleeping in the cold or anything like that, we need to be doing more work, certainly. But if we had one of these guys on for an interview, that would certainly be a question I'd ask is sort of why. I mean, this costs money,
I've read some stuff, although it's limited, about how atheists are less charitable. I think this even accounts for tithing and religious donations that I think are not really charitable themselves anyway. So hopefully this is one way to change that. But we have other things that I think atheists are very excited about. For example, there's a Kiva group and other microlending websites that try and help impoverished countries or poor people by microlending, which is kind of a gamble on the person's part for the loan,
right?
If you're not familiar with it,
but spreads out the gamble to be very small and simply affect thousands of people instead of one person for $1,000.
Right.
This ties in a little bit with the interview that will be airing later on in the show. In terms of Camp Quest, there were also questions for him that we asked in terms of why do you need a specifically humanist or secularist kids summer camp when there are plenty of themed kids summer camps that are not offered from churches. So maybe his answers later could resonate here.
Yeah, we actually also discussed the difference between, sort of secular activities and non-secular activities when we talked about an atheism and children episode. I believe that was episode 93. We sort of discussed it. I think some of the panelists were a little skeptical of a atheist summer camp, but I think he addresses them well. And stay tuned for that. And so we also had some information about humanist chaplains in the military, because the military, as we all know, has a lot of chaplain services for people who are struggling in the military with their various hardships. And I think there's actually kind of a culture of religion in the military. I've even seen things where there's mental wellness tests that have spiritual questions to it. So I've seen a variety of things from that. What do you have about the humanist chaplains, Chris?
Well, we've done this story in past episodes, just that there is a man by the name of Jason Heap who wants to become the first humanist chaplain in the Navy. He's a 38-year-old, and he has the endorsement of the Humanist Society. But the Humanist Society, of course, is not a recognized religion in terms of, the tax benefits and whatever sort of other maintenance and paper upkeep you have to do with the U.S. government. So on July 23rd, lawmakers in the House approved an amendment to a spending bill that was for the Pentagon, which simply reaffirmed their current standing that the military only has standards for endorsing agencies, this is a quote, which must be recognized religious and faith-based organizations. That's from Representative John Fleming, a Republican of Louisiana, from his spokesman. So roadblock, basically, in Jason Heap's quest to be the first humanist chaplain. The interesting question here for me is that if the ruling is really so simple as you simply need to be, a federally recognized, quote unquote, religious organization, does that mean that atheists, at least on paper, or humanists on paper, are going to have to come out and say, yes, humanism is a religion of sorts? I mean, what's next? Are we going to have to lobby them to change all of their forms to use more generic wording?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting problem, especially in the legal system that it creates, is if atheists don't consider themselves anything, like no religious class whatsoever. Right. How can we have protection? And I think, because I would subscribe to the idea that it's not really a religion; it's a lack of religion, right? I think a lot of people take that perspective as well. Mm-hmm. Like the bald is not a hair color, right? And certainly that's the most logical thing to do it. But you might have to sort of consider yourself a quasi-religion of sorts to try and actually have some sort of protection or legitimacy as an alternative means, which is kind of strange. We should have, I think, secular alternatives as such a progressive society in so many, at least in certain other ways. Very bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know what the fear is. I don't know if a chaplain in the Navy or any other branch of the military draws a stipend or something, and then maybe they're afraid that any organization might come in and just, like PETA would have a chaplain or something. I mean, I don't know if that's sort of the extremist slippery slope argument that people use, or if it's just anti-atheism sentiment, or
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah,
I agree.
But
very difficult. So I guess we talked about this guy a lot, mostly because he's been good, though. But the new Pope, he's been pretty good, don't you think?
Pope Frank.
Yes, that's what we call him. He's our pal, right?
No. Pope Francis. Yeah.
Yeah, Pope Francis. We've praised him a little bit, and in kind of a weird way, I guess, because he's been more open.
Right.
He's less lavish. He's more accepting.
There was a story back in May that he sort of insinuated that even atheists, if they do good, are considered redeemed, which the Vatican had to sort of do a somersault around. Remember that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he's not – I don't know if he can ever be there. And I don't know where there is, but I mean, he can't really get to this place where I think it's like, hey, we get it. Both you and I, we get it. Like, and I don't think he can get there. But he's come a long way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Not the atheist pope that we're all hoping for.
Right. Yeah. I don't think that's going to happen. But his at least in practical terms, he's been very accepting and accommodating, which is, I think, quite good. And he recently came out and discussed gays too.
He did.
And it's kind of like the atheist comments, though, right? It's pretty good, but not quite there, I think.
Right. He was, I believe, on a plane with reporters, and his response to one question about homosexuality, he said, and this is in Italian, but, quote, "If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" Which a lot of people took as, the sort of nice, proper human attitude that we should take towards people. And that was a relief.
Right. Yeah. But within all of this is still this idea, well, I think he would still classify, gay activity as a sin. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you can really extract that from that point of view. I think the Pope will always have this kind of position. I think it's more of like, I don't judge you, but God might judge your behavior. We're all sinners. We're all struggling. Right. I think that's the popular point of view. And really, I think that's still a bit ways off from the healthy perspective, is saying, well, it's not really a sin. It's just who they are.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with it in any way. But certainly it's better to say, well, they're human beings too, and I respect who they are. I don't judge them.
Right. This is, I suppose, you could pigeonhole this in the same old line about hate the sin, not the sinner. And, it's okay to be gay so long as you never actually act gay in any way. He also said on this plane trip that even though his predecessor, John Paul II, had closed the door on the idea of female priests, this is from the New York Times article on July 30th, that he sought a, quote, theology of women, and that he wanted a greater role for them in Catholic life. So that didn't receive as much news, though, I suppose.
I've read on the internet, some people are like, haha, atheists, you guys are like the Pope kind of idea, right? And it's like, I disagree with him very much on a lot of concepts and philosophies, but what type of person would I be if I wasn't relieved that someone with such a vocal position, someone can speak with so much authority, even if it's, magical, imaginary power, right? That they would not be using that for better ends and better results than they have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a one-dimensional, black and white form of thinking to say that you could never praise your enemy, your quote-unquote enemy, that you have to be criticizing them. I mean, that would be a very sad world if we can't recognize the shades of gray,
right,
on all sides.
Yeah, certainly. And so I think it's great. I hope and expect him to come out with other very good ideas. And hopefully this is a trend. Hopefully the appointing council has decided to start appointing more reasonable popes in general in the future.
Maybe. I mean, they were caught by Joseph Ratzinger's resignation, and Francis, I forget what his non-pope name is, but he was already sort of on the bench. So This actually could just be a case of them having to go a little deeper in their bench than they wanted to. So I wouldn't necessarily call it indicative of a change in perspective. Although, it's true that they've been having trouble retaining people in the West, and that they're, really aiming heavily for South America, which in part may have been why this guy was chosen. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's fun, as long as Frank the Loose Cannon Pope is out there, I think we're going to have a pretty interesting time.
Yeah, it sounds great to me. So this is kind of related, I guess. I wanted to talk a little bit about beliefs and why we should respect them, or why we better yet, why we should not. And I think that I've been in this conversation multiple times throughout my life, and you'll see it in discussions online or in person. And people will say, well, you should respect people's beliefs. You've come across this, right? I think it's pretty popular.
Yeah, sure. And that atheists are rude, for instance, I suppose, is something you're going to touch on.
Right. I think that really goes hand in hand with this whole idea. So the idea is I'm a jerk because I don't respect someone's beliefs. And I think that, just up front and clearly about it, I think that that's just really stupid. I don't think you should respect people's beliefs because they have them. I don't think beliefs are worthy of respect. This is not a novel concept. I haven't come up with this, obviously, but I think it's an underappreciated perspective on the whole issue.
Right.
And I think this applies to all beliefs, but especially religious beliefs.
Now, this possible quibble pivots heavily on the definition of respect here. What do you mean exactly?
I think that's kind of confusing, right? So what does anyone mean? Like, I think it's better when you say, okay, so there's a couple things, right? There's behavior of how you treat this person, and and then there's also, they're separating their belief from the person. So there's a couple things going on. Mm-hmm. I think that it depends. The level of how you treat someone depends on what they're saying and how they're saying it and what their belief is, right? I don't think you should, and this is kind of a silly example, but a racist opinion, racist point of view is not worthy of respect. And it's someone's opinion. It's something someone thinks, right? But society has collectively said, well, those are the classification of ideas that people just don't respect. And that deserves a certain level, a certain tone towards those opinions because they're just repugnant, right? But if we take different ideas, like let's say the creationist idea, I'm not going to be as vile or mean to someone who's got a creationist idea. It's just a stupider idea, right? Mm-hmm. But certainly someone has the creationist idea, but because they have it doesn't mean that I should respect it. People's beliefs and ideas need to earn respect based on how they're formulated and discussed. I think you should treat people with respect as the individual. But I think people can separate, and perhaps this is where the problem is, separate the idea from the person. And I think a lot of people have trouble with that. And I think a lot of people have trouble understanding the difference if they're on the receiving end of that as well.
Now, am I conflating something when I say that you would definitely criticize a religious person's attitude of separating, when they say hate the sin and not the sinner? That it's somehow the concept which is bad and not the person who expresses it. Mm-hmm. Does that not apply to what you're saying, where you're, saying that, well, we should ridicule bad ideas. Bad ideas need to be proven before we can just blindly accept them, or in the case, we just shouldn't blindly accept them. But is there no responsibility or fault to lie with the person who essentially propagates or carries them? I mean, it seems very just defensive to say that, it's like a very safe position to say that you're not talking about people, you're talking about ideas.
Right. I think that you have to be sort of clear and certainly avoid ad hominem in a conversation to separate the two ideas. But I think you can. But I think that, like, let's take religious belief. There are people who are much smarter than me. There are many, many of them, millions, billions probably, of people who are smarter than me. Who are it's hard because there's like lots of uneducated people in third world countries, but certainly they have more, capacity than they're amounting up to. So with these billions of people who are more intelligent than me, many of them are religious, and I can recognize that, and any atheist should recognize that. Yeah. That just because you've come to this correct conclusion, because this is the correct position to take, does not mean that it is. I mean, basically the position is that they haven't justified theirs. Essentially, and they haven't. You don't have to come to this conclusion, and anyone can. It doesn't mean that you're smarter or stupider than anyone else. And so, even with that example, I think that's one way you can distinguish who someone is and their idea. Someone's not stupid because they're religious or a Christian, and someone's certainly not smart or intelligent because they're an atheist.
So would you say that the real difference, the real thing that you're pointing out as a deficit is the lack of a significant quantity of like empirical thought in someone's beliefs? If it were possible for someone to have a significantly or a comparable amount of empirical thought in their philosophy that somehow wasn't atheism, would you not have to give them due credit?
Yeah, I believe that's the general perspective, and certainly the level of credit I would give varies on how sound their thoughts are on this.
But not Chris Langan.
Not Chris Langan. No.
Don't look that up, folks.
Yeah,
it's not worth your time. Okay.
Right, and so I think it's really, and I feel like it's sort of pedantic to go down the thing. Well, I don't respect your beliefs automatically by default, but I respect people's rights to have those beliefs. And that seems so trite, and like we've been there, we've done that, we've gone there as a society, we understand that difference. But it seems like in practice we don't get that. It should be given that, of course, I respect your right to say these things, but people would somehow attack you for saying, well, I have the right to say whatever I want. Certainly you do. I have the right to criticize you in however way I choose. But that doesn't mean that somehow your ideas are shielded from criticism or that they are even good. There's lots of awful ideas that come in all sorts of stripes that are just reprehensible.
Right.
And like Eva said, the ones that aren't, the ones that fall within this normal realm, those aren't necessarily automatically good ideas. So I think
what sort of respect is being given religion today that you find undue? I mean, because certainly the idea that religions can have churches and congregate, you would never say that that's wrong, because that's just sort of a freedom of belief, freedom of expression thing.
Certainly, people
and we dissect or we would definitely nitpick if there was something like a religion of racism. It would be pretty easy to pull that apart and say what people could and couldn't do. But what's something that people do right now in religiosity that you think is undue respect, and why is it undue? How does it harm society?
Sure. Well, you and I were even having a conversation. Let me try to use this example. We were having a conversation out one night, and we met a fellow, and he was of this almost Deepak Chopra idea that your thoughts create the universe itself. And there's lots of people who are religious who have these very peculiar ideas about the universe, and they have maybe a new age idea. There's a wide range. I mean, I could spend countless hours reciting the different kinds of religious beliefs people would have, but people won't get challenged. And this sort of idea that, oh, well, they have this belief, you shouldn't attack it. And I don't think I'm very aggressive about it. But if you're having a conversation, why can't you ask them, well, what do you mean by that? Why do you think that? I don't think it's that offensive of a question to say, why do you think that? And just ask them why.
Right.
But even these things seem offensive. And I think that is a significant problem. The basic questioning or conversation is somehow not permitted or taboo. And the consequence of that is these really stupid ideas are promulgated and respected. So I guess that's the way I feel about it.
Don't you think, though, and this is not fair, but don't you think that there are people who will express their ideas, who think that their ideas are clever, but the reason that they're perhaps beyond criticism is that they want to simply express themselves, but they don't want to debate anyone about it. They're sort of read-only conversations, and that's obviously not fair, but you can see why someone would call you a jerk if you call them out on it, if it never crossed their mind that they would be called out on it. Because the vast majority of people don't really seem to care, right? I mean, we have, at least in America, we have religious pluralism, and it's considered sacred, no pun intended.
That's peculiar, right? Because something that I think you and I would agree with creationists or literalists, biblical literalists, is that the question of whether or not there was original sin in the Garden of Eden is an important question. Whether or not there is a God that has certain characteristics and wants certain things of you, I think is a paramount question. And I think we agree with those strict biblical literalists about this. And so I don't think people think it's an important enough of a question. People set it to the side and just sort of think what they have been raised to think. And I think those are central questions about reality, and people should talk about them and confront them. But to your original point, people should not always be on the guard of their ideas being attacked by some rude atheist like myself. I agree with that. I get that. But there are lots of contexts where you're having a conversation, and the simplest line of questioning is viewed as offensive. And I think that this barrier that society has erected and pointing to me to be the rude person because I don't respect people's beliefs is unfounded, especially when you start getting to a more public forum. Certainly, if you're in a small group, that's a different category of exposure than once you get to a discussion or a panel or a Q&A or books, things like that.
Right.
And that's open.
What's the actual fear that there's going to be legislation about this? That there's going to be discrimination on beliefs? Because I mean, how is it going to negatively impact you, though?
What do you mean?
Just besides being annoyed, how does a Deepak Chopra-esque worldview negatively impact your society if it propagates, to 10% of the population or something? Well,
part of it is that I just think a society is better off when what is it? Is this the Tom Rant episode you've now turned to?
No. We'll cut you off very shortly, I'm sure. But,
Yeah. I think that it's very important to have a society that values what is true and what is not true. And those aren't original ideas of my own. Many people have echoed those. And I think that's very central, just as a philosophical perspective, is what we are. What are we as human beings? Why don't we take advantage of those things that make us human beings?
But it's not important what they believe so much as how they act, right?
Yeah, and those things affect how they act, I believe. I look at science.
They probably do, but is that not sort of a boogeyman argument if they haven't done anything quite? I mean, which they have. It would be pretty easy to say that they
look at the acceptance of evolution in this country,
right? Primarily
because of religious belief. Look at the acceptance of gays. Thank God that it's actually become better. It's a majority of people who accept them.
Right,
but look at science education. It's terrible.
Science education is a good point, but in terms of, another thing I was going to bring up, if the acceptance of evolution is abysmal in this country, it's sort of interesting that the the genetics industry is still doing very fine here. So in that sense, it's almost inconsequential in certain ways. You know what I mean? It's like there was an old comic from that webcomic XKCD where they're like, an easy way to find out if an idea is true or if it's a belief is to find out if it's financially exploitable, right?
Right, and I think that brings to another good point about why you think why you might ask why this is important is look at the political dialogue. Political dialogue takes an issue and runs with it. For example, evolution or other different or gay rights or gay marriage. These things, I think individuals would be better equipped to deal with these things if they had their beliefs on an individual level roughed up a little bit, or even question the basic level. Because if these things are how they vote or how they act politically or how they act in general, and the real core reason why these people act in this way is protected by a societal bubble that says, hey, you can't ask questions like this,
right?
Then it's never going to get changed. And those things that are actually the cause of this other behavior is so protected that it can't be addressed.
I do agree with you. I just think that the friction that you would experience, the so-called rude atheism, there's something there to be explored, but perhaps another time.
I agree. I can see there's some validity in that claim, but yeah. So that's my perspective. I don't think beliefs should automatically be respected because people have them. Certainly not novel, but definitely something I subscribe to.
Yeah. So
actually, a long time ago, Robin sat down with Reza Aslan, who was on Fox News recently. This actually blew up a lot, and he went on Reddit. I think you saw that too, right, Chris?
Yeah.
So Reza Aslan, a religious scholar who went on Fox News, we actually interviewed him a long time ago, a couple of years now, I think, with Robin, talking about belief in respect of Muslim beliefs and things like that specifically. You can check it out at our website at AmericanAtheist.org. But we also have an interview in this episode with David Diskin, who is the president of the, I believe, Western Division of Camp Quest, a secular camp for youth. So check it out. Let us know what you think. If you have any feedback, again, at AmericanAtheist.org, go to the contact section and let us know what you think. And here's the interview. I'm here with David Diskin. David Diskin is a longtime supporter of the atheist community, bringing us Sacramento Free Thought Day, as well as being president of Camp Quest West, a secular camp for children. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate taking the time to be here.
So why don't you tell everyone what is Camp Quest?
We're like you said, we're a secular summer camp for kids. More specifically, we have about a dozen locations throughout the United States, two of which are in California. They're for kids with ages 8 to 17. Just a week-long program where parents can drop off their kids on a Sunday and pick them back up on a Saturday, and we spend the week teaching kids about science, peer review, critical thinking, the great outdoors. We throw in a little bit of humanism and evolution kind of stuff, and they make a lot of friends and have a lot of fun.
So how much does it typically cost children to attend this?
Well, each location's a little different. In California, we charge $5.97 for the full week. That's room and board, food, all the art supplies and bows and arrows and everything else. But we do offer a number of financial, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, financial aid for families that can't afford to send their kids to camp at that $5.97 rate. And that's all subsidized by the Free Thought community.
Okay. So we'd actually talked about some of this on a previous episode, and I guess some of the co-hosts didn't really get it. So I mean, there's this one position like, well, like atheism isn't even really a thing, and people who attach secular stuff to something and then add more like free thought, I guess, it's kind of strange because it's like not collecting stamps. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. Or we're bald as a hair color.
Right. So what do you say to that response?
Well, I think that there's a natural reason to think that, it's easy just to lump us into the category of the atheist alternative to Jesus camp, but that's not the case. Anybody who's been involved in the very least with the secular movement knows that there's all kinds of meetup groups and organizations whose purpose is just to get people together, to allow them to make friends, be social, to volunteer, and all that kind of stuff, because they're not going to church, and so they need that connection somewhere else, and that's what those meetup groups provide. We kind of see Camp Quest along the same way. We recognize that there's families who want their kids to have a camp experience, maybe to learn a little bit about science while they're at it, but not to go to camp and risk being proselytized to or being teased because of their religious or non-religious beliefs, where they can make friends that are also of the same worldview that they are.
So, I think there's also a particular concern that it's children involved. And I think some people have this idea, well, isn't this just as bad as religious people then? You're really just indoctrinating children to a belief when you started at age 8, I think you said. And at that age, they're just too young to really critically analyze the things you're telling them. What do you say about that?
Well, I think that you're right. They are too young at that age, certainly, to be having those kinds of conversations about whether or not there's a God and the nature of the universe to some degree. But let's address what we're actually teaching kids here. We're talking to them about science, peer review. We're not telling kids, no matter what age they are, that there isn't a God. We're not telling them that atheism or humanism or any of that stuff is correct. And I think that's the difference between the term indoctrination and what we're doing. When you indoctrinate kids, you're telling them, hey, this is how the world is. You can't really think about it. And if you break away from that dogma, then you're going to hell. And that's not at all what Camp Quest is about. We teach kids how to think using science. When they're older, and they're coming to our camp and they're 15, 16, 17, then we have, much more deeper discussions about religion and about ethics and morality and all of that kind of stuff. But even then, at that age, we're never going to tell kids how to think. It's against the concepts of science. We're going to teach them to say how to think, what to think. We're going to teach them how to think. We're going to teach them about studying the world around them, about understanding the concept of peer review and the cores of science. And yeah, we're going to teach them about evolution. We don't consider evolution to be a controversial topic by any means in a scientific realm. So yeah, we do a lot of work on evolution, on climate change and the environment. But when it comes to religion, we're not teaching them the right or wrongs of it. If anything, we're giving them tools to make their own decisions.
I see. So I'm looking at a typical day at camp, and you have the things you'd expect at a camp. For example, you have assemblies. You also have the daily physical activities like archery and canoeing and arts and crafts. But you also have things like free thought activity. Can you walk me through what a typical free thought activity will be?
Yeah, when we talk about our free thought extravaganza, which is really just a fun way to spice up science, we basically have 9 or 10 activities throughout the week, and we cycle the kids through those in smaller groups because we usually have about 80 kids to a camp. And so we'll break them down into groups of 20. We'll bring them into a room like the lodge or outside by the fire pit or out by the meadow. And for about an hour, twice a day, they'll get some kind of scientific activity. For example, one that we're working on for next week is called Tubes of the Future. And what we're going to present the kids with is this scenario where we pretend that from the future, and of course we're camp counselors, so we're making this as exciting as we can. From the future, we've been delivered these tubes, and they're PVC plastic pipes, and we need to figure out how they work, and in order to save the future of humanity, right? And so there's a plot behind it. And we get the kids all excited about, learning about how these tubes work. And what they're going to realize is that there's these, series of ropes and connecting parts inside the tubes that they can't see. All they can really do is operate on the outside of the tubes where some ropes are sticking out. And we give them the tools to reproduce the tubes. We give them all the ropes and pulleys and a few other extra things that aren't needed, and we ask them in small groups to try and recreate what they think they have. And we walk them through the scientific method in doing that. They form some hypotheses. They write down on paper or they sketch out on paper what they think these tubes have inside them, and then they test out the hypothesis, and then they share that finding with other people in the group, and then they share their group's findings with other groups that are there, and then they make some determinations, and they figure out if they have the right tube, if they put it together correctly or not. So that's one of the examples of some of the things that we do in terms of science and peer review and teaching that. But we also have all kinds of activities that we lump together under that free thought extravaganza, things about science, about the environment, things about mathematics, where we even talk about things like Drake's equation and Fermi questions. We do have two that are on activism this year. Not specifically activism about atheism, but just activism in general. Our theme this year is taking the reins, and we want kids to understand that they are empowered to take action when they see something wrong, whether that be bullying, or even if it is church-state separation or anything along the lines. We're inspired by folks like Jessica Alquist and Zach Copeland to challenge the people in charge if something is wrong, or to report to the people in charge when they see something's wrong. And that all falls under our free thought extravaganza.
I see. It kind of reminds me of the series of tubes that creates the very internet that we talk on. So
That's right.
So you mentioned all the kids interacting and trying to solve problems and things like that. I imagine there must be some sort of conflicts that arise too. And how do you deal with children who, because even if they're raised in a secular household, especially at that age, they must get very mixed signals and very confused. How do you deal, especially with conflicts amongst the kids when it comes to those questions?
Well, most of the kids, like you said, come from secular homes, and so they're being raised with understanding of science and evolution. Religion is not typically brought up in those homes. Not to say that we exclude people if they are religious. We've had religious campers in the past. But when there's conflicts, we resolve those conflicts just like any other group of people would. Anything that you'd see in a classroom, we depending on what the conflict is and the nature of it, we take the kids, perhaps take them aside and talk to them as maturely as we can about why they're having this issue, why they're having this conflict, and to help them to understand, the reality of the situation. If they're conflicted with science, then we see this as an opportunity to teach them more about science and why science is so important. If they're conflicted about religion, maybe they do come from a religious background, then we help them understand that, this is not a religious camp, and it's not the opposite of a religious camp. It's a camp that we focus on science. However, the target market for this camp is people of a secular nature. And they know that when they're filling out the form.
Right, I see. And how do you select the camp counselors that will be watching over these kids?
Most of our camp counselors are college students and teachers or educators of some kind. Every single volunteer that shows up on camp, whether they're a volunteer for the whole week or they're just showing up for a day or two, every single person needs to be live scanned. It's actually a California requirement, and so that gives us all the background check information for felonies or anything else that might be a problem. So we run everybody through a live scan. We also do background checks. We do 3 reference checks. We have them write a number of responses to questions, kind of like the question you asked me about conflict. And then on top of the background reference checks and the interviews and everything else that we do, we also require that every single counselor goes through about 80 hours of online training. 80 hours of online training. Yeah. And then in person, nearly 2 full days of in-person training where we do things like icebreakers and role-playing, walk through the activities and all kinds of stuff like that. We're pretty rigorous.
Sounds
a lot of that, probably about half of that is actually California requirements. Oh,
I see. So what got you personally involved in Camp Quest?
I was down in Burbank in 2009 at the Atheist Alliance International conference. Richard Dawkins was there giving an award to Bill Maher, and I happened to be volunteering to be the photographer for the event. And I came across this table about Camp Quest. Chris Lindstrom, the president at the time, was there, and I just asked about it. I'd never heard about it before. And I found out that it's up where I live, near Sacramento. And when I found out that, and that they were looking for volunteers, this sounds like something that I have to be a part of. And so I volunteered to be there in the summer of 2007 as a counselor / photographer, and had a blast. Joined the board a year later, and then when Chris stepped down from president, I took over that role, and here I am today.
So if people want to find out more about this, or they want to help out, where can they go?
Well, if they want to find out about the California camps, they can go to www.campquestwest.org. But if your listeners are from anywhere outside California, like I said, we do have over a dozen locations throughout the U.S., and if they go to campquest.org, from there they can click on a link or a map to all of the individual camps. I will point out that about half of the camps are already done by now for the summer, but there's still a number of other ones that are going on. Ours is next week. I don't know when this is going to air, but ours is the 2nd and 4th weeks of July, but the other ones all vary. But even still, even if camp is done and there's families listening or potential volunteers listening, they should still get in contact with us. At the very least, most of the camps have a newsletter. Most of the camps have a page to fill out to be notified for next summer, for registration or for volunteering. And I imagine all the camps, just like us, need volunteers throughout the whole year to send out thank you cards to our donors, to take care of little things like inventory, and to write curriculum for next summer. That's a big component. We host parties throughout the year, kind of like little gatherings, get-togethers for families to come and see each other again. So anybody that's listening that wants to help out with that, we would love that.
All right. Well, thank you, David, for helping clarify everything, and I really appreciate all your enthusiasm and support that you bring to the atheist community.
Thanks for letting me kind of clear that up and help people learn a little bit more about camp.
All right, thanks, and check it out, Camp Quest.